Good evening. Thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Greeny. The spending bill is a done deal. We have details on some of the tax benefits. Americans go on a mortgage refinancing binge. But what are the risks of using your home as an ATM? And crank up the printing presses. European Central Bank is determined to devalue the euro. Support the economic recovery. That and much more coming up on NTD Business. We're on a home refinancing binge. In the past year, Americans hit almost $3 trillion in refinances and extracted over $150 billion from the value of their home, more than any year since the 2008 mortgage crisis. Record low mortgage rates, sky-high valuations maximize the opportunity for homeowners to cash out, but it's not without its risk. If you refinanced and cashed out in 2006, 2007, and then watched prices plummet in 2008, you still had to pay off that new larger mortgage. Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO of Quill Intelligence, compares cash outs to using your home like an ATM machine. Asked her why she thinks it's a problem.
A home should be viewed as something where you build up the value, and when it comes time to retire, you no longer have, because when you retire, you're living on a fixed income. That's what the term fixed income comes from. So in theory, when you retire, you no longer have the fixed income of the mortgage. You've had your 30-year mortgage, you've paid it off, and now you can live on whatever you've saved for retirement without having that great big, the largest expense in your budget anymore. But it's also, to me, a sign of how very frothy markets have been. People don't realize that home prices are rising at a faster pace if you look at 2020 and 2021 than they were in 05 and 06. And that's something to be said.
And on that point, usually in a recession, we see the prices of houses come down. This time we saw them go up. What does that mean looking forward?
So, it's very hard to determine. That the new stimulus bill is going to extend forbearance out to the end of September 2021. So there will be millions of American families who will not have paid their mortgage since April of 2020 when we get to October the 1st of 2021. These things seem incredible, but given the bent of the current administration and the current Congress, I can't foresee anything but these terms, these forbearance, the foreclosure moratorium, the eviction moratorium. I can only see them being extended further out again.
You feel this will keep prices up artificially for the foreseeable future?
Well, it definitely has kept prices up. That was the initial artificial prop, was that as opposed to having distress go through the market and washing out the people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to keep their homes, which would have brought prices down to a certain extent. Instead of that, we just put everything on hold. And then we had the Fed marching in and buying up enormous amounts of mortgage-backed securities, in addition to a trend that we've been seeing for years, and that was, millennials had already started to migrate out of the cities as they pressed into their 30s, looking for a little bit more space. But that trend was turbocharged when COVID came around, because there were so many people who were trying to get out of densely populated urban centers. They didn't want to be going up and down crowded elevators anymore. So that really, those two elements, the Federal Reserve's intervention and this kind of massive exodus from urban centers, has really produced the perfect storm in a good way for the housing market in 2020. But again, my concern is that we really are pushing into overheated territory here.
Maybe you can help me get my head around this as well. I was having a discussion about these moratoriums with a friend of mine, and I was kind of thinking, who gets hurt, really? Because, okay, the guys get to stay in their homes. The lenders have already flipped the mortgages, like you said, to the Fed. So who really suffers by not allowing, by not allowing evictions?
Well, so you have to keep in mind, the lenders aren't in that bad of shape. We are talking about 2.6 million or so mortgages. So it's not a huge part of the pool. But the flip side of that is that 48%, pre-COVID at least, 48% of landlords in America were small business people. So they haven't had relief extended to them, and yet they've had to provide relief to their tenants. And so that is where you really get to where you're talking about picking winners and losers as a matter of public policy. And there's that certainly is not the way that it should be. And as a result, we've also started to hear stories of homes that are not being maintained and kept up as they should be, because if you're a landlord and you have absolutely zero coming in the front door in terms of income, it's very difficult to maintain your tenant's home as you should.
Yeah, I think so. I think it all has to come to a head eventually. Ms. Booth, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
The Federal Reserve says American households ended last year with a record amount of wealth. But its new report doesn't give a breakdown between higher income families versus poor ones. Recent reports showed that it was mainly the wealthy that became wealthier. NTD's Christina Kim reports.
American households ended 2020 with a record $130.2 trillion in wealth. That's according to a Federal Reserve report, which shows that household wealth in the fourth quarter rose by $12 trillion compared to a year earlier. The report covers October through December, which saw a surge of government stimulus spending and cheap money from the Fed. Rising equity markets added nearly $5 trillion in wealth the fourth quarter, while rising real estate accounted for around $900 billion. Balances in cash, checking accounts, and savings deposits rose by just over $640 billion to a record $14.1 trillion. Congress has just passed another $1.9 trillion pandemic relief bill, which Republicans said was filled with wasteful and unnecessary spending. Still, the U.S. labor market remains in a deep hole compared to pre-pandemic levels, with around 10 million fewer jobs. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Like Christina Kim just mentioned, many credit central bank policy with inflating bubbles like the stock market, real estate market. But the European Central Bank, seemingly oblivious to the effect on its own currency, it says it will continue with massive money printing until at least next year. Like the Federal Reserve here in the States, the Bank of Japan, it's undertaking quantitative easing, printing new money to keep borrowing costs low, make sure European governments can take on more cheap debt so they can somehow get themselves out of an economic hole. The Eurozone's seen no growth since Q3 last year.
Surveys and high-frequency indicators point to continued economic weakness in the first quarter of 2021, driven by the persistence of the pandemic and the associated containment measures. As a result, real GDP is likely to contract again in the first quarter of the year.
I'm not sure how giving unproductive countries more money is going to solve the problem. Maybe Lagarde should check how they're spending the money first. But hey, maybe that's why I'm here and she's there. But why are central banks so obsessed with keeping bond yields low? Why don't they just let them rise, and then maybe only people who can actually turn a profit on that money would actually borrow it at the higher rates? There's a stimulus idea. And the Trust's chief economist Daniel Lacaille is in Europe. I asked him what would actually happen if rates were allowed to rise.
Nothing, absolutely nothing. The problem is the following. All those commentators that say that, quote unquote, yields are soaring, it's almost a joke. Look where bond yields are relative to inflation expectation, and look where they are relative to history. Bond yields are absolutely depressed. They've just had a minuscule, a very, very, very small increase in the last weeks, an irrelevant rise that actually should be healthy. Because if you think about it, the purpose of quantitative easing and the purpose of support from the central bank is to buy the lowest risk asset and the highest quality one, i.e. sovereign bonds, allow bond yields to fall. And as the economy is recovering and savers are more confident and investors are more confident, then they step back and those investors will buy those bonds and with actual real demand. No, that's the objective. What is the problem? The problem is that they bring down yields artificially to a level that is simply unacceptable for investors, even in a growth period. And if they even dare to make a minimal reduction in monthly purchases, then bond yields rise significantly. But again, I come back to the point. The problem is not where they have risen to. The problem is where they have fallen to, is how ridiculous the level of bond yields has gone to with this massive purchases that we have seen in the past. And what this does is to cloud the perception of risk of investors, because investors see that bond yields from sovereign issuers are relatively low and stable. Therefore, they take considerably more risk in other assets. The reason, as you just mentioned, why people are saying that central banks cannot afford for yields to go higher is not because there would be any problem with a small increase in yields in sovereign bonds. It is because there would be a problem in all of those much riskier assets that central banks have repressed investors into buying.
Some people comment how government financing of their own debt would skyrocket, get out of control. Is this a valid argument?
It is. It is a valid argument because right now, this idea that in growth periods, central banks cannot normalize and in recession periods, government have to spend more. In reality, what is becoming is a perverse incentive to continuously increase the unsustainable level of deficit spending. And within that, what we find is that the diminishing returns in terms of growth and the diminishing returns in terms of productivity and real wages becomes more evident. Therefore, instead of having a massive burst and a tremendous crisis, what all of that leads to is Japanese-style stagnation.
Really appreciate it as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
And speaking of big spending, President Biden just signed the $1.9 trillion stimulus package into law this afternoon. Here's what he had to say.
This historic legislation is about rebuilding the backbone of this country and giving people in this nation, working people, middle-class folks, people who built the country, a fighting chance. That's what the essence of it is.
Biden says the majority of people and politicians of all parties support the bill, but Republicans say only a small percentage of the money goes to pandemic relief and the country is already on its way to recovery without the massive bill. But Biden says he will speak more about the bill tonight and in the next few days. The president took no questions from reporters and the whole historic event lasted about 2 minutes. So support the bill or not, it's here. And it does come with some tax benefits, so how can you take advantage of them? NTD's Colin Fredrickson reports.
The motion is adopted.
4 tax benefits have just been passed in the recent stimulus bill. 3 of them involve increasing tax credits.
Credits subtract the taxable income dollar for dollar. So say we have $10,000 in credits and you have $5,000 in tax bills associated with $10,000 in credit would wipe out the $5,000 taxes due and also provide a $5,000 refund.
For the Earned Income Tax Credit, childless workers get 3 times more, from $530 to $1,500. The 65 age limit is eliminated, and childless workers can claim the credit at age 19 instead of 25.
The Earned Income Tax Credit is basically, set at levels for keeping jobs and employment open, right? And so as employers and as employees, you're earning tax credits for actually working.
For the child care tax credit, families get 50% of their expenses for kids under 13, $4,000 when there's 1 child, and $8,000 for more. Previously, it was 25 to 30%, with maximums of $3,000 and $6,000. The child tax credit has now risen from $2,000 to $3,000 for children under 18 and $3,600 for every child under 6. And the employment benefits, which are normally taxed, are tax-free for your first $10,200 if you made less than $150,000. Many taxpayers face a big problem. They don't know whether they should file their next tax return.
The credits are really taking place in 2021, and the stimulus and the unemployment are taking place in 2020. So the more concern right now is the focus is on what should I do to get my stimulus? Should I file an early tax return so I can get it and maybe get the prior one that I missed?
Experts recommend sitting down with professional preparers and consulting with CPAs to get a good opinion.
People really have to strategically think about their stimulus packages and stimulus refunds and how to best file their returns.
The IRS hasn't clarified if it will extend the filing deadline. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
And just a reminder, some of those tax breaks won't start until next year, meaning when you file your 2021 tax return. So you should consult your accountant for details. Now the spending bill is passed. The Senate is already working on a major infrastructure bill. The price will start out at a modest $320 billion, but some Republicans worry that price will go up as their voices are steamrolled in the process. NTD's Sapphire Couture brings us the details.
To be led by men and women.
Senator Tom Caper is the chairman of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee. On Wednesday, he told reporters on Capitol Hill there's a broad agreement to get to work on transportation infrastructure in the U.S. He said, that's a Democratic priority. It's a Republican priority. It's a priority of our new president. Caper asked all of the other senators to find out what their states need in terms of infrastructure and then report back by March 9th.
The bill as amended is passed.
The initiative comes right after Democrats passed their nearly $2 trillion stimulus package without any Republican support. Democrats ignored or brushed off many of the Republicans' amendments to the package, making some worry they could do the same with an infrastructure bill. Senator Shelley Moore Capito is a ranking member on Caper's committee. She weighed in, telling reporters, I am concerned about it because there's a lot of chatter about just basically denigrating our ideas and saying we're just going to go big. But Senator Lindsey Graham seems more hopeful. He said if there's any issue that can gain bipartisan support, it's infrastructure. Graham told reporters this is really the best chance to do something together, maybe the only chance. Everybody needs roads and bridges and ports.
Mr. Bennett.
Democrats used a budget process called reconciliation to cut Republicans out of their relief package. If they do that again for this infrastructure bill, they could face resistance from Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. That's because he doesn't support using reconciliation for that matter. Democrats would need at least one Republican senator to cross the aisle if Manchin tries to block the bill. Lawmakers hope to have President Biden sign the bill by the end of September.
Stocks rallied to record highs today. The Dow rose 189 points or 0.58%. S&P 500 gained 41 points or 1.04%. The Nasdaq added 330 points or 2.52%. Those big tech stocks, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, led the rally, recouped those losses from that recent pullback. Fewer than expected Americans filed for new jobless claims, still over 700,000, but couple that with Biden's signing of the stimulus bill, strengthening expectations of a strong recovery, Wall Street's fear gauge hit a 2-week low. In other news, Denmark, Italy, Norway are among the latest nations to suspend the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine pending an investigation. It comes after reports that some patients developed blood clots after being injected. Danish health authorities have decided to suspend the shots for 2 weeks. A 6-year-old woman there who got the vaccine formed a blood clot, then died. But Danish authorities say they can't confirm if that was caused by the vaccine. Earlier this week, several European countries suspended use of that same batch of the AstraZeneca vaccine, as after reports of death and an illness in Austria. But an EU drug regulator says there's no evidence so far linking AstraZeneca to those two cases. AstraZeneca said today its vaccine has been extensively studied in phase 3 clinical trials, and an EU drug regulator says the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine outweigh the risks and did not recommend suspending use. There you go. Facebook is dropping plans to run a fiber optic cable from California to Hong Kong. It says it abandoned the plan after pressure from the United States government. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Facebook is giving up on its plan to build an undersea internet cable linking the US with Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Americas project, known as HKA, would have connected 2 sites in California with branches in Taiwan and Hong Kong. The Wall Street Journal reports that US national security officials pressured Facebook to drop the project. Facebook said it withdrew the application due to concerns from the US government. It says it looks forward to working with all parties to reconfigure the system to ease the government's concerns. Facebook first proposed the project in 2018 along with several Chinese companies, including China Telecom. This is the 3rd time in 6 months that Facebook dropped internet projects linking the US with Hong Kong. It comes after the DOJ warned the FCC against directly linking to Hong Kong. It cited the Chinese Communist Party's crackdowns in the region. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
10 years after the Fukushima disaster raised serious safety concerns for the nuclear power industry, there's still an appetite for nuclear power across the globe. Here's an overview.
Right now, there are about 440 nuclear power reactors operating in 32 countries, plus Taiwan. Together, they provide around 10% of the world's electricity. Nuclear is the second largest low-carbon power source after hydroelectricity. The US is the largest global nuclear generator for 20% of its electricity needs. That's double the size of France, which relies on nuclear for a massive 75% of its power. The US generation is 2.5 times bigger than China and 4 times bigger than Russia. Nuclear demand is rocketing as countries decommission fossil fuel units and the world attempts to cut its emissions of carbon dioxide. About 50 power reactors are currently under construction in 16 countries, China, India, Russia and the UAE high on the list. 100 more are either on order or planned, and 300 more have been proposed after upgrades or lifetime extensions for existing facilities. By 2040, generating power globally will have increased by more than 30 times. Nuclear will then produce 8.5% of the world's electricity, alongside a bigger share for renewables.
Rolls-Royce is reporting a $5.5 billion loss for 2020. The jet engine maker's business was badly shaken by the pandemic, but its CEO says the worst is now over. NTD's Patrick Hayden takes a look.
Rolls-Royce has reported a loss in 2020 of $5.6 billion. Its CEO, Warren East, says that the worst is over, but if that's not the case, then the company is still well placed to handle more turmoil. Rolls' model of charging airlines for the number of hours its engines fly meant much of its income dried up last year when travel stopped. That forced it to ask shareholders for cash and take on $7.4 billion of new debt. Its civil aerospace arm, whose engines power Airbus A350 and Boeing 787 jets, accounts for just over half of group revenue in a normal year. Last year's cash burn of $5.9 billion was in line with analysts' expectation. Rolls-Royce says it will reduce it to $2.4 billion this year. During 2020, the company axed 7,000 jobs, which is 15% of its staff. It also earmarked £2 billion of assets for sale to repair its balance sheet. Analysts predicted a loss of $4.3 billion. The company expects the rollout of vaccines worldwide will help bring back travel and the industry back to profit. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Still to come. I don't want to alarm you, but Costco is running out of some cheeses. The explanation's complicated, but will it affect other products too? And are you getting more robocalls these days? We explain why and some tips on how to stop them. That and more after the break.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
Brokerage firm Real Estate Exchange, or REX, is filing a federal antitrust lawsuit. It's targeting real estate website Zillow and its subsidiary Trulia and the National Association of Realtors. REX says its clients complained their property listings were being buried and were more difficult to find in search results on real estate websites. It claims Zillow and the NAR are trying to stop them from bringing lower fees to consumers. REX says an update to the Zillow and Trulia websites in January caused the problem. It explained that listings from agents that are MLS members now appear under a default tab labeled Agent Listings, and those that don't belong to an MLS are downgraded to a separate tab labeled Other Listings that needs to be clicked on in order to be viewed. A spokesperson for Zillow says the company believes the claims have no merit and intends to defend itself, and the NAR spokesperson says the lawsuit has no legal basis. If you like Costco cheese, you better move fast. It says it's running out of certain varieties. They're facing difficulties stocking imported cheese because of a global shortage of shipping containers, plus bottlenecks at key ports on the West Coast. This has caused shipping delays for suppliers and delays for retailers receiving the goods. The situation is also raising higher supply chain costs, and it's not just cheese that's impacted. The problem is also affecting seafood, olive oil, furniture, sporting goods, and lawn and garden equipment. Inflation's coming. And it's far and away the biggest consumer complaint to the Federal Communications Commission. And if it feels like you've been getting more robocalls recently than during the past year of the pandemic, a recent report says you probably have. Mandy Geither explains why and ways to stop the calls.
Getting more robocalls again? You're not alone.
If you're feeling like you're getting more robocalls, it's because you are getting more robocalls.
New data from YouMail, a robocall prevention service that tracks those calls across the U.S., says Americans received more than 4.6 billion robocalls in February, up 27% from January. But why? Point to the pandemic.
As we seem to be coming out of the pandemic, call centers are opening, and therefore there's more robocalls. And the reason for that is there's really no point to making a robocall unless the person on the other end is going to press 1 or call you back. And you need a person when they do that.
To avoid those unwanted calls, the FCC says don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Beware, caller ID showing a local number doesn't necessarily mean it's a local caller. If you do answer, don't respond to questions and don't hit a button if prompted to. Scammers often use this trick to identify potential targets. Never give out personal information. You can also talk to your phone company about call blocking tools they may have and check into apps that you can download to your mobile device to block unwanted calls. Finally, make sure your number is registered on the National Do Not Call Registry. Mandy Gaither.
If you're using a robocall blocking company, you should let them know which numbers are making unwanted calls. That way they can help block those calls for you and others. And that's the latest business updates for today. You can still catch NTD Evening News at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. That's Stephanie Cox. For NTD Business, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.